mortgage fraud, fake T4s, forged bank statements, and conflicts of interest. We're going to talk about all of this. This is all based on the CBC documentary that just came out. A good friend of mine, who is also a mortgage broker, was interviewed in the documentary. I'm going to get his thoughts on what this documentary did well, what it missed, and some learnings for all of us from what we just saw. Hi, my name is Vas, and I'm a chartered professional accountant by training. However, I am a full-time real estate broker right here in Toronto, helping you navigate through the insanity that we call the real estate market. We go over a bunch of questions people had online in regards to this documentary. We touch on everything from race to what we think the regulator is going to do about this going forward. If you want to follow him on Twitter, here's where you can find him. Let's get into it. Sanj, thanks a lot for making the time. The CBC documentary had quite a bit of drama around it. I think it was an interesting documentary. I think the intent was good. I think the end result of it is going to be interesting. So I guess let's start off by maybe how did the whole thing even come about for you? Like, how did they reach out to you, and what was your experience like on the actual documentary?
So they had seen some of my comments from previous tweets. I want to say going back to like March, something like that. I was kind of just messing around on Twitter, putting out whatever, right? Like day to day stuff. And at the time, I was a little bit slow because the market had just kind of slowed down a little bit and stuff was starting to kind of turn a little bit. So things had died out just a touch, right? And in that time, I was finding myself cold calling and trying to network a little bit with different people I don't already know in the industry and getting my name out there with new brokerages, right? I tweeted out something to the effect of 3 out of 4 brokers asking, realtors asking me for creative assistance, right?
I remember
And
that. Yeah.
yeah. So that was probably February, March, maybe April, something along those lines. And then a few weeks later, someone from CBC emailed me about that, asking if they could pick my brain about it. And I said, sure, let's have a conversation. So I ended up speaking to that individual and kind of going through the process of just them getting to understand what I'm doing, who I am, where I come from, all that good stuff, and me kind of getting an understanding as to where their thoughts were and what they're trying to do. Um, they had some general questions for me about the mortgage space and all that good stuff and kind of what they were hearing about and if it was true. And I'm not gonna lie about it. It is what it is. This stuff exists. And from there we kind of blossomed the conversation into an interview request. And I just thought, this is going to happen with or without me, and I might as well kind of get myself involved with this and kind of create additional, I don't want to say additional exposure, but create an opportunity here for me to have a hand in the narrative, right? And if you don't have a hand in the narrative, then they can kind of say whatever they want. At least by me being there was the question of it only happening in the South Asian community, for example. I had an opportunity to answer that. There was more said for sure, but it is what it is. It's a 22-minute piece. They're not going to put me up there for all 22 minutes, right? They got more to cover in that time than they did, right?
Yeah. The part I found fascinating is that, well, first of all, good for you for going on it, because I know a lot of people might have probably skipped on it just because I know that, as bad as it is to say, a lot of us are aware of these things happening. Like, we are aware they're happening. I don't know actively people that they're doing it, but I know it's happening. Word of mouth, you get a couple of realtors
For sure.
offline and people will talk about this stuff, right? So I guess it's I recognize that it's not easy to go on these things because, like, even you alluded to it, you've gotten hate mail from it, and because this is so entrenched in everything that's happening with the entire space. But I guess let's start with the one comment that I thought this is something that I learned actually from you before this documentary. So I know, okay, let's even just give people some context. So these fake mortgages, or whatever you want to call them, fraudulent mortgages, they used to, or they are still called Brampton loans, or this is what they were called. And that's how I learned about them. That's how I've known about them, with presumably because they happen in Brampton and because of the Yakety Act. So I guess let's talk about it, because I know from my own culture that I mean, nobody's immune from this. I think this is not a racial or a cultural issue. I think this is more of a desperation issue. This is just, who are the
Yeah.
people most at risk? It just happens that it's immigrants. Maybe it's people that are self-employed, whatever the case may be. It doesn't seem to me like it's a racial issue, but I want to get your thoughts on this whole Brampton loan and South Asian community and all this stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the Brampton loan comment, it is what it is. The name kind of stuck from a situation that happened with a pretty prominent lender back in 2017. That group had been exposed to, if I remember correctly, about $250 million worth of fraudulent mortgages. And all of that business was put through their system. Well, I wouldn't say all, but the significant majority of that business was put through their system by one broker based out of Scarborough, right? So the funny thing about that is that broker is still practicing. So that tells you how serious the regulators are about fraud. I mean, this person's been practicing since 5 years down, $250 million down, almost took a lender down with them. And from that, individuals like Mark Cohodes and some other hedge fund types out from the United States saw that whole package as far as the data goes, and just identified that, hey, these deals are being done through this Brampton area, but it's all being done by the Scarborough broker, right? So it's kind of like this Home Life Miracle Group, for example. They have offices throughout the GTA. This broker very likely had an office in that area and was doing business in that area specifically to conduct these types of transactions. And just to take it a little layer further, I mean, I've heard of brokers commuting to Brampton all the way from South Oakville, Burlington, North York, Etobicoke, because that's where their offices are, so that they can do this type of business, because it's been created as a hub in a sense, right? So it's kind of sad to see, and it bothers me that the people that are doing this the most and bringing the reputation down the most aren't even Brampton people. They're not even locals. They come from outside Brampton just to do dirt in Brampton and kind of drag our name through the mud in a sense, right? It's upsetting in that sense. As far as South Asians go, shit, man, Brampton's population is like 40% South Asian. Naturally, with that type of correlation, these things are going to be intertwined with each other, just from that perspective alone. Now, with the CBC report being what it was, I mean, yeah, okay, we saw a lot of South Asians in there, predominantly South Asians in there as far as the brokers and realtors went. It is what it is, man. I mean, CBC found a path here. They pulled a couple threads. They got a couple of people talking. They just so happened to be South Asians, and they ran with it, right? I don't necessarily blame CBC for how they approached that. I don't think it's necessarily racist or they had nefarious intentions in any respect with that. It just kind of happened that way. Now, could they have done better and spent more time and money, get a Cantonese or Mandarin speaker calling Cantonese and Mandarin speaking brokers, or Italian clients calling Italian brokers? Like, yeah, they absolutely could have. But one thing I know for sure, and it's just an indictment on my people, but we're pretty open about how we operate. We're pretty open about what we're doing. Like, Vas, you and I have known each other for the better part of the year. What's that, like 10 months now? And in that time, we've come to know each other very, very well, just because we have very open dialogue. That's how I am with just about anyone that I come across, right? And that's a cultural thing I feel within my community as well, that they're very direct, plain, and straightforward to deal with, right? In this scenario, kind of worked against them. It is what it is, right?
Did you know, I guess, when the document, because I'm assuming they filmed this piece over the summer, over a prolonged period of time, did you know that it's going to end up being is going to single out a single culture, or you weren't aware of that yet until you saw the actual piece? Or did you know that while they were doing it, or did you even ask questions? Did anything like that come up?
No, that didn't come up. I didn't know any of that until I sat down with them for the interview and went over the hidden camera footage with them. And in that
Okay.
moment, in that meeting, is kind of when I saw on an iPad all the different footage that they had, and it was pretty well exactly what we saw on TV. Maybe one or two pieces they didn't use, but I think it was from the same meetings that they had. So you saw the majority of it.
Yeah. So the one, I guess, the reason my knock on this documentary, again, I thought it was the right idea because it was a single culture for the most part. It made it racially, it made it look more racially biased than anything. And I think that in itself made the documentary weaker, because the dialogue online and in the comments is about the racial part of it, rather than, like, it just took on a
Absolutely.
story of its own, right? So I think it took away from the actual issue at hand, when the racial part is not necessarily the issue here. But anyway, that's kind of like
Absolutely.
from my layman view in terms of what happened. I want to touch on one thing I learned, and I can't remember if it was from you. This was, or if it was Ron. Somebody had posted on Twitter that delinquencies from these quote unquote fraudulent mortgages are among the lowest. And I can't remember if Brampton actually had the lowest delinquencies on mortgage payment in GTA, or whatever the stuff is. I just found that super counterintuitive, and I found that fascinating, that you would think the people that are creating fraudulent documents and stuff are maybe going to default first, but apparently that's not the case. So do you have any data, or just what are your thoughts on this? Because that I thought that was really interesting.
I don't have the data. I believe it was Ron who shared that data with us, and it was probably dated information at this point because he was looking at it from a report from I want to say 2015. But it is true. I mean, these people, for example, that are doing the fraud mortgages, like, dude, they're pulling out $10,000-$20,000 to pay a broker fee for documentation. If you can afford to pop 20, $15,000-$20,000 into that situation, then you've got money. It's not that you're hurting for money. It's just that you don't have money the way the bank wants to see it, right? They may not have T4 income, for example. They may be self-employed and not reporting all their income on their taxes. So those different factors are kind of what drives them into that hole, right? Now, the newcomer side of things, yes, there's issues there that they're being taken advantage of, and we saw that on the documentary as well, where they don't know the rules or the structure necessarily, and they kind of end up with an individual that steers them the wrong way, right? But I still wouldn't think that the default rate is high on these particular ones, because now there's more incentive to maintain and keep it going, and pay the mortgage before you eat kind of thing, just because there's so much wrapped up in owning that property, right? As far as delinquencies go in Brampton, oh man, I don't have the official data for it, but I'm positive significantly lower than anywhere else in the GTA. It is a very strong culture of owning property in the South Asian community, and just and a simple kind of thing about my culture, our culture, if I should say, is that we really stick together when it comes to supporting each other, right? I mean, when people in our community immigrate, for example, like my parents, my dad came down with his two brothers in the 70s. And after that, every single relative of ours that moved to Canada stayed with one of those three brothers until they got established. If they needed help with a down payment or a purchase of a car or a house or whatever, the help was there, right? We always help the next group kind of get going. And even throughout my childhood and just my time growing up in Toronto, I mean, I was born and raised in Brampton. I've been living there since 1990. In that time, I can count 6 or 7 families that came through our doors that lived with us to get established in this community. That's not things that you see outside of immigrant communities, and I bet that you wouldn't see that in most immigrant communities either, right? To go even one step further than that, like, if I needed $500,000 tomorrow, I could call about 3 people and pick up 3 drafts, and I'd have the money in my bank account by the end of the day today. Like, that's how my community operates. That's how we move. That's how we help each other when people need help. Giving each other 6 figures, 100K here, 200K there. It's not unheard of. It's pretty normal for us, and that's another kind of layer to this whole thing. So, like, if I needed to buy a property and my dad could give me 100K quickly for sure, he'd probably call his brother, say, "Hey, I need another 150K. Can you send it over?" Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll have the $250,000 for my down payment tomorrow. Not to say that's something that I do, but it's there if I ever needed it.
Yeah, it highlights what the community is like. And I think, listen, man, I'm an immigrant too. I can't speak for other cultures, but this is common in a lot of cultures, especially when you're new and you kind of have to stick together because it's the only network you do have here, right? So who else is going to help you? So I can totally understand that, to be honest with you. I get it. So I guess the next thing I wanted to find out, and more from a realistic point of view, do you think, actually, wait, before we even go there, do you think the banks currently, or the lenders currently, know that this is happening and they're just choosing to turn a blind eye? Like, what, I know that people say that, but do you actually think that, or is this just something people say, or are lenders actually aware and they just choose not to do anything about it because the mortgages are being paid?
Unequivocally, yes, they know. Yes, they're aware. No, they have not cared for a long time. If it's an egregious, blatant fraud, yeah, they're going to shut you down and not approve your file, but they don't care, man. It's just flat out, they don't care. There hasn't
Okay.
been any losses to this point in time, right? There hasn't been much in terms of default either. Until there's a loss, until there's risk on their side, they will not care because they're making money out of it at the end of the day, right?
Right. Okay. So basically so the way I look at the levels of accountability here is, starts with a person. Obviously, if a person is desperate, they're going to do whatever they can to get the loan. Then you have the lender. So the lender doesn't seem to care either. And then the regulator also doesn't seem to care. So basically at every single point, we are actually creating an incentive here for you to just go and do this. Okay. So look, the way I see it, and look, maybe I am maybe I'm too a pessimist, but I think 3 months from now, when this thing is long forgotten, nothing will have changed. And my concern is that a documentary like this coming out publicly, let's say one thing is internally in the industry, we know what's happening. You choose either to participate or not, right? And now that it's public, people are gonna, I'm thinking, and if nothing changes, people are just gonna seek out these types of people, and this thing is just gonna perpetuate. It's gonna become possibly even a bigger thing. I don't know. Do you think that's in line? Like, what's your line of thinking? If nothing gets done, what happens in the short term and long term with this stuff?
Look, I'm hopeful that the regulators and industry stakeholders are, taking meaningful actions and steps to, solve this issue and get this nonsense out of the business. I believe the playing field needs to be leveled as far as business goes, right? Like realtors shouldn't have to be competing with other realtors that are doing dodgy stuff behind the scenes just to get their deals done, just to get their properties sold, or just to get their buyer clients into a home. Mortgage brokers shouldn't have to be competing with people that are doing criminal activity at the end of the day just to keep their doors open and their business going. If I'm being ethical, if I'm being honest about the work that I do, why should I be suffering or losing business because somebody else is willing to turn a blind eye to criminal behavior? That's just my 2 cents on it, right? Now, 3 months from now, I really don't see much happening from this. A year from now, I really don't see much happening from this. If anything's going to happen, it's going to take at least a year and a half, 2 years before meaningful action comes down the pipe. And even that's a pretty hopeful estimate, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think earlier on when you said that the guy that the Scarborough guy that was behind the quote unquote Brampton loan, if he's still operating right now, I mean, that's kind of
Exactly.
like, that tells you everything you need to know, which is somewhat unfortunate. But the way I see it with these things, it's you see these people, they come and go, right? So you
Yeah.
can't build a long-term business doing this, because if one thing I can tell you for sure in the real estate industry, lips are loose. So somebody does this, they will have to have people that do it with them, and somebody talks, and it just, they do go through their 5-year cycle, somebody gets caught, on to the next, right? But you can't build a
Yeah.
business like this. So unfortunate, but this is the reality, at least as far as I see it right now. Look, I have one question actually, more about actionable advice, and this is something that just came to my mind right now. Let's say I wanted to get a mortgage, and credit history or whatever, maybe whatever the case may be. Let's say I'm one of these people that can't, that would be tempted to go down this route. What are my options if I didn't want to take that risk? Like, what are my options? Like, for example, I've heard of people saying, you can start with if you can get in with a B lender, maybe you can do a 1-year interest only mortgage with that, or with a private, but I'm not sure how any of this stuff works, just to build up that history or just to show proof. And then hopefully the house would have gone up in value, but obviously we don't know if that happens. Is there any actionable advice that you can think of for somebody that's at this point, that's considering buying, that wouldn't put them in a position where they're doing this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the answer that everybody wants. Like everybody wants to think that they can walk into a big five bank and get a mortgage and walk out kind of thing. But at the end of the day, if you're in a situation where your credit's not great, or you don't have certain qualification metrics that you need to get into a big five institution, then you take your steps that you need to, right? So let's say, for example, your credit's not great. You go to a B lender, they have looser credit restrictions. You get your approval there, you build your credit up for 2 years, then you move up, right? You get to the A's. It doesn't have to be a big five institution either. There is A side lending from these smaller institutions, right? The other side of this is that you don't necessarily have to go down to an A side right away if you're self-employed either. Like if you have a business and you're tax sheltering, whatever it is, pay your full taxes for 2 years, right? Report your full income for 2 years. At the end of the second year, once it's done, all said and done as far as your reporting goes, you go get your mortgage from an A lender and then you revert back to your tax planning. That's pretty normal. That happens pretty frequently. The only thing is that you have to be able to show 2 years of history for your A lender institutions that you get in and you move on. But once you're in, they're just going to keep renewing you unless you decide to refinance or anything like that. You do need to be planning ahead for refinances, but once you're in kind of thing.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense, because it applies to me, right? As self-employed. running
Yeah.
this through a professional realtor corporation, through a prec.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, actually, and this is just again selfish, I'm going to ask this question. Do you know off the top of your head, ballpark, what is the spread? Because I know there are some lenders that will look at gross income through a corporation rather than what you're paying yourself. What's the spread of, like, for example, if variable is, I don't know, 5%, let's say with an A lender, what am I looking at if I go with an alternative lender that looks at gross? What kind of interest rates would they be charging me?
Give me 1 second here.
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to put you on the spot, like a ballpark, because I was just selfishly, I was like thinking about this. I'm like, you know what? Let's see. I got you on the line.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to double check because I have the rate sheet actually, like it was open from before. You know, kind of looking at prime plus 0.65 right now, and prime with these guys is, I believe, 5.7 at the moment. So like you're looking at 6.6, sorry, 6.35, let's say, right? So you're about a percentage point higher.
Okay. Okay. So that's the cost of, so that's because again, as the former accountant in me, I'm trying to quantify how do I play this? Do I run my money through a salary versus dividend, and then the offset or the cost to that is running it, paying a percentage more on my mortgage. So okay, so that's cool.
Yeah,
Um,
that's exactly it. That's the way you got to look at it. Either you're going to pay the government or you're going to pay your lender. Pick
right.
which,
Yeah.
pick your poison, right?
Yeah. Somebody's got to get paid, which is fair. All right. And look, last question for you. And just I want to touch on this because I think it is kind of sad, but you did mention you were getting hate mail. I want to know the sort of hate mail you're getting, just so that people understand what, like, speaking against, I guess, what's happening, what that results in.
Yeah, I'm getting people sending me emails and stuff about just things like accusing me of having done it myself, and I've never done it. You can look at my compliance history if you want to, Fizra. You're more than welcome to. I've never done anything of the nature. I made my bones on the private lending side, and I've only come into the AB side in the last year and a half or so now. My business partner, the principal broker at my brokerage, he's been on the A side for about 25 years. So we're all above board, and that's where we make our bones. That's what our whole business is all about. As far as the mail goes, people accusing me of being a goody goody now because I want to try to present myself in a certain way. Listen, man, I'm a jackass, and I know I'm a jackass. I've always kind of been that way, and I'm not a goody goody. I'm not that kind of guy, but like it is what it is, right? If you're gonna come after me about this, it just shows that you're stupid more than anything else because you're admitting to having done it by accusing me or attacking me for speaking out about it. There hasn't been any threats. It's been a little bit of racist stuff. I don't give a shit, man. I've been called a packy since I was 4 years old in Toronto, man. I'm used to it. I got thicker skin than that.
Fuck, that's unfortunate. All right. Well, I think listen, man, thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope you found this video insightful. If you liked it, please subscribe and like the video. This gives me the feedback I need on what kind of content you want to see in the future. And if you have any questions, real estate related, you can always reach me. I love chatting real estate, and I'll see you in the next one.